Daf Yomi, Tractate Sanhedrin, page 112. A, top of the page, Kuf Yud Beis Amud Aleph, with the word Kasha. The Gemara comments, the matter presents a difficulty with the opinion of Reish Lakish. Iboilahu Hudichu Me'alihen Mahu Biadichu Amarachmanu lo Shehudchu Me'alihen Oidilma Afilu Hudchu Me'alihen. A dilemma. It's interesting, I had this idea that in the Gemara you say, oh Dilma. Dilma means when you're having some kind of quandary, you don't know which way to go. So you could call it a dilemma. Oh, Dilma, I'm in a dilemma. Interesting. Oh, Dilma, a dilemma was raised before the sages. If the inhabitants of idolatrous cities subverted themselves to idol worship and were not subverted by others, what is the halacha? Since the merciful one states, and have subverted, or perhaps it may be inferred, but not if they subvert themselves, or perhaps, meaning, oh, Dilma, I'm in a dilemma, Dilma, or perhaps even if they subverted themselves to idol worship, the city can be deemed an idolatrous city. Tashima Hidichu anashim uketani mamai leheve kedurutchum alehen hanach batar nafshayu gridi hane batar nashim uketanim gridi. The Gemara suggests, coming here as a resolution of the dilemma from the Mishnah, if women or children subvert the inhabitants of the city, these idol worshippers are judged as individuals. Why is that so? But their status be considered as though they subvert themselves. Apparently, if the inhabitants subvert themselves, the city is not deemed an idolatrous city. The Gemara rejects this proof. These cases are not comparable, as these who subvert themselves are drawn after their own initiative and worship idols wholeheartedly, and therefore perhaps the city is rendered an idolatrous city. Those who are subverted by women and children are drawn after women and children and are not committed to idol worship, and therefore perhaps the city is not rendered an idolatrous city. Ad sheyudach ruba hechi avdinan amar Rav Yehuda danin v'choshvin amar le'ula nimtzata me'anet dinan shel elu el amar ula dinin v'soklin danin v'soklin. The Mishnah teaches that a city is not deemed an idolatrous city unless most of the inhabitants of the city are subverted. The Gemara asks, how do we act in order to determine if most of the inhabitants have been subverted? Rav Yehuda says, the court judges each inhabitant suspected of idol worship, and if he is found liable, imprisons him in jail, and judges and imprisons each succeeding idolater until a majority of the city has been convicted. Ula said to him, that will result in you delaying justice for those already sentenced and awaiting execution, and it is prohibited to delay justice. Rather, Ula says, the court judges each inhabitant and stones him if he is found liable, then judges and stones each succeeding idolater until half the city is found guilty, and all future convicted idolaters are executed by the sword. Itmar Yochanan Amar Danin v'Soklin Danin v'Soklin Reish Lakish Amar Marbin Lahem Bate Dinin. It was stated that there is a parallel Amoraic dispute. Rabbi Yochanan says the court judges and stones the idolater, then judges and stones each succeeding idolater. And Reish Lakish says one increases the number of courts for them so that all the inhabitants of the city can stand trial at the same time, and the means of their execution will be determined with no delay of justice. Eini? The Gemara asks, is that so? Ini? V'hamar Rabbi Chama bar Yossi, amar Yehoshua, v'yotzeta et ha'isha hu o et ha'isha hahi, ish v'isha ata motzi lesharecha, אתה מוציא כל העיר כולה לשעריך, אלא מרבין להן בתי דינין ומעיינים בדיניהן. ומעסקינן להו לבית דין הגדול, וגם להו לדינהו, וכך לדהו. The Gemara asks, is that so? But doesn't Rabbi Chama bar Yossi say that Rabbi Yehoshua says that it is written, and you shall take that man or that woman out to your gates, Deuteronomy 17 verse 5, from which it is derived, you can take a man and a woman out to your gates, and they are judged by a local court. But you do not take the entire city out to your gates. Instead, they stand trial before the great Sanhedrin. Rather, the procedure is that one increases the number of courts for them, and those courts analyze their cases, and when they conclude that a majority of the inhabitants are guilty of idolatry, they are not sentenced. Instead, we take them to the high court, Sanhedrin, and the court issues the verdict of the idolaters and executes them. Hake, take, et yoshvei ha'ir v'chulei tanu rabbanan, החמרת והגמלת, העוברת ממקום למקום לנו, בתוכה, והודחו עמה, אם נשתהו שם 30 יום, הן בסייף מוינם עובד, פחויס מכאן, הן בסקילו, וממונן פלט. It is written, you shall smite the inhabitants of that city with the edge of the sword, destroy it utterly, and all that is in it, as animals with the edge of the sword, Deuteronomy 13:16. And sages taught in the Braita. The caravan of donkeys and the caravan of camels that moved from place to place, that lodged in the city and were subverted with it, if they had stayed there 30 days, they are executed by the sword, and their property is destroyed. If they had stayed there less than that, they are executed by stoning as individual idolaters, and their property is spared. Uraminu kama yeh be'ir v'yeh k'anshe ha'ir 12 chodesh. Amar Rav Akashi, ha le'mavi b'nei meis b'nei masa le'meha b'miyat v'mata. And the Gemara raises a contradiction from a Braita. How long shall one be in the city, and as a result, his status will be like that of the residents of the city with regard to giving charity and paying taxes? He is obligated if he remained there 12 months and not 30 days. Rava says this contradiction is not difficult, and it may be resolved. This period of 12 months is the period required to become one of the citizens of the city. This period of 30 days is the period required to become one of the inhabitants of the city. Ve'atanya Hamudar hana mibnei ha'ir im yesh adam shenishtaha sham 12 chodesh אסור ליהנות ממנו, פחות מכאן, מותר ליהנות ממנו, יושבי העיר, אם נשתה 30 יום, אסור ליהנות ממנו, פחות מכאן, מותר ליהנות ממנו. And so it is taught in the Braita with regard to one prohibited by a vow from deriving benefit from the citizens of the city. If there is a person who would stay there 12 months, it's prohibited For the one for whom is deriving benefit is forbidden to derive benefit from him. If a person stays there less than that, it is permitted for the one for whom deriving benefit is forbidden to derive benefit from him. With regard to one prohibited by a vow from deriving benefit from the inhabitants of the city, if there is a person who had stayed there 30 days, it is prohibited for the one for whom deriving benefit is forbidden to derive benefit from him. If a person had stayed there less than that, it is permitted for the one for whom deriving benefit is forbidden to derive benefit from him. In the context of an idolatrous city, the reference is to the inhabitants of the city, which includes anyone who has stayed there for 30 days. Hachre mota v'tkol asher ba v'chule tanu Rabbanan. Hachre mota v'tkol asher ba prat לנכסי צדיקים שבחוץ לה, ואת כל אשר בא לרבות נכסי צדיקים שבתוכה שללה ולא שלל שמיים. ואת כל שללה לרבות נכסי רשעים שחוצה לה. It is written, destroy it utterly, and all that is in it. Deuteronomy 13:16. The sages taught in a Braita with regard to that which is written, destroy it utterly, and all that is in it. This serves to exclude the property of the righteous that is located outside the city, which is not destroyed. And all that is in it, this serves to include the property of the righteous that is located inside the city. It is also destroyed, as it is stated, and you shall gather all of its spoils into the midst of its square. Deuteronomy 13:17. From the term its spoils it is derived, but not the spoils of heaven. All consecrated property is excluded. The phrase, and you shall gather all of its spoils, serves to include the property of the wicked that is located outside the city. It is also destroyed. Amra Shimon, mipnei ma amra Torah, nichsei tzadikim shibetocha yovedu, mi garam lahem. שידור בתוכה ממונה, לפיכך ממונה מאבד, אמר מר, ואת כל שללה תקבוץ, לרבות נכסי רשעים שבחוץ לה, אמר רב חיסדא, ובנקבצים לתוכה. Shimon said, for what reason does the Torah say that the property of the righteous that is in it shall be destroyed? Why must they suffer for the sins of others? The reason is, who caused the righteous to live in the city inhabited by wicked people? Is it their property that tied them to the city? Therefore their property is destroyed. The Master said, it is their property that tied them to the city. Therefore their property is destroyed. The Master said, the phrase, and you shall gather all its spoils, serves to include the property of the wicked that is located outside the city. It is also destroyed. Rav Chisda says, and this is the halacha only with regard to property that can be gathered into the city. Amar Rav Chisda, pikdoinos shel anshe ir hanidachas mutolin. Hechidomi, ir hemadiach yeres v'itanu, b'gaveh, pshita demutarim, lav shlalahu, ve'elu didehu, v'itanu, v'ir acheres. I denekabtin l'soicha, amay mutarim, v'en nekabtin l'soicha, amachad zimna. Rav Chisda says, despite the inhabitants of an idolatrous city, deposits of the inhabitants of an idolatrous city are permitted, meaning that they aren't destroyed. The Gemara asks, what are the circumstances if we say that Rav Chisda is referring to property belonging to inhabitants of another city, and that property is deposited within the idolatrous city? It's obvious that the deposits are permitted, as the deposits are not its spoils. They are the property of others, but rather saying that Rav Chisda is referring to property belonging to the inhabitants of the idolatrous city, and it is deposited within another city. If so, the status of that property should be like any other property, belonging to the inhabitants of the idolatrous city. If its property can be gathered into the city, why are the deposits permitted? It was already established that the property of the wicked is destroyed. And if its property that cannot be gathered into the city, didn't Rav Chizda already say once that this property is not burned? Lo. Le'oilam דעיר אחרת תמחקדי בסוף של החבא עסקינן כגון תקביל עלי אחריות מהו דתמה כיוון דקבל עלי אחריות לידי דמי כמשמעון. The Gemara answers, no. Rav Chizda is actually referring to property belonging to inhabitants of another city that is deposited within the idolatrous city. And what are we dealing with here? It is a case where an inhabitant of the idolatrous city assumes financial responsibility for the deposit in his possession. Lest you say, once he assumes financial responsibility for the deposit in his possession, the status of the deposit is like that of his own property and it should be destroyed. Therefore, because it teaches us that deposits are permitted and not destroyed. אמר רב חיסדא, בהמה חציה של עיר הנידחת וחציה של עיר אחרת אסורה. איסא חציה של עיר הנידחת וחציה של עיר אחרת מותרת. מהי תימה? בהמה כמאן דלא פליגי דמיא. איסא כמאן דפליגי דמיא. Rav Chizda says an animal that is half the property of an idolatrous city and half the property of another city is forbidden. By contrast, in regard to doe, that is half the property of an idolatrous city and half the property of another city, the half that belongs to the other city is permitted. The Gemara asks, what is the reason for the difference between them? The Gemara explains, an animal is like an entity that is not divided, as it is possible to eat part of an animal only through the slaughter of the entire animal. Therefore, if any portion of the animal is forbidden, the entire animal is forbidden. Doe is like an entity that is divided. Therefore, the fact that one portion of the doe is forbidden does not render the entire doe forbidden. Boy, Rav Chizda, Bahemes Yelnidachas, Mahu, דתדהני בשחיטה לטהרה מידי דבילו לפי חרב אמר רחמנא לא ישנה שח דרשה לא ישנה כת מקלט אוי דילמה כיוון דשחטה והניה לה שחיטה מאי תגו. I believe this is either, I don't want to make a mistake here, but it's around the 185th Teku in Talmud Bavli, according to the book of Rabbi Aharon Yehoshua Pessin, who wrote a book of that name, and he cataloged all the Tekus in Shabbos. And this would be, I was keeping track of it, but I don't remember off the top of my head now. It's 184, 185, or 186. It's in that area. At any rate, Rav Chizda raised a dilemma with regard to the animal in idolatrous city. What is the halachi? The animal of an idolatrous city. Is ritual slaughter effective, at least in purifying it from the ritual impurity of an unslaughtered animal carcass? If animals of the city are killed but not ritually slaughtered, they're impure with the impurity of a carcass and transmit impurity by means of contact as well as if they are lifted. Will the ritual slaughter of those animals prevent the transmission of that impurity? Is that so? Since the merciful one states, and it's animals with the edge of the sword, indicating that it is no different if one ritually slaughtered the animal, and it is no different if one killed the animal. Another way, its status is that of a carcass and transmitted impurity. Or perhaps, since one ritually slaughtered the animal, ritual slaughter is effective. and it's not considered by the edge of the sword. What is the halacha? And this dilemma shall stand resolved until the coming of the Messiah. Boy, Yosef, Sharnash Muskonya is Mahu, Se'ar, Nashim Tzidkonya is Mahu, Omarave, Hadir Shoyes Azur, Tigbots Visaraf Taktiv, Misheno Mehusar, Ela Kivitsa, Svefa, Yatsa, Ze, Shemehusar, Tilisha, Kivitsa, Svefa. Yosef raises a dilemma. What is the status of the hair of pious women in the idolatrous city? Must it be destroyed? Rava says, is that to say that the hair of wicked women is forbidden and must be destroyed? And you shall gather and you shall burn, it says. Deuteronomy 13:17 is written and is derived, an item that is lacking, meaning that it requires only gathering and burning must be destroyed, excluding this hair which is lacking, detaching, gathering, and burning. Therefore, even the hair of a wicked woman is not forbidden. Ela amarava bepeanochlis echadami demechuar beguva geguva damya lo yitzricha de televisiv kenichsi tzadikim shebetoch adami le'avad or dilma'a kivadad yavanavka kelevusha adami tegu. Rather, Rava says this dilemma is raised with regard to a wig. The Gemara asks, what are the circumstances? If the wig is attached to her body, its status is like that of her body. The Gemara answers, no, this dilemma is necessary only in a case where the wig is hanging on a peg. Its status is like that of the property of the righteous inside the city, and therefore is its status like that of the property of the righteous inside the city, and therefore is destroyed. Or perhaps, since she enters and exits with the wig, its status is like that of a garment, and is not destroyed. This dilemma shall be resolved. This would be the 185th or the 186th Tegu in Shas. Possibly 187, but probably like either 185 or 186, around there. Okay. Well, I hopefully, Lee Netter, God willing, I will clarify it in maybe the next daf, once I check up on that. V'et kol shlalat tikbots el toch lechova v'chulei tanu rabbanan ein lachov el nas zirei dachas tever Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Akiva oimer ein lachov oisino choiv b'mai kamef legi marsel rechova mi'ikara mashma marsel rechova ashtana mimashma. With regard to the verse, you shall gather all of its spoil into the midst of its square, Deuteronomy 13:17, the sages taught, if the city has no square, it does not become an idolatrous city, as it does not fulfill the criterion mandated by the verse. This is the statement of Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Akiva says, if the city has no square, one creates a square for the city. The Gemara asks, with regard to what principle do they disagree? The Gemara explains, one sage, Rabbi Yishmael, holds its square indicates a square that existed from the outset, and one sage, Rabbi Akiva, holds that its square can also indicate a square that was created now.